I lived in this country for the last 60 years, so I will be telling you about my first 30 years of life back in Europe, and that's a long, long time ago. But once you start thinking about those years and trying to remember, it's amazing how it all comes back, and some of the things I'm going to be telling you about came back very vividly as I was just remembering them, trying to put my discussion for you together. At the outset, I want to tell you that I undertake this talk about my experiences during the Second World War with some trepidation and humility, if you will, talking to a group like this. I know that all of you, or most of you, are veterans of the Second World War or the Korean War, and I'm sure that every one of you have a story to tell, and my story will be somewhat different from the stories you could be telling, because my experience during the entire Second World War was different. Throughout the war, I was stateless. I was not citizen of any country. I didn't serve in any army. I didn't carry weapons. I didn't fight. And my main objective throughout the period was to just stay alive and survive all the upheavals that were happening around me. So it will be somewhat different story from what you normally would hear. I have a handout that I believe John made available, having some 7 maps, and I'm going to refer to them from time to time in order to help you orient yourself as to what I'm talking about as we go on. I was born in Moscow, Russia in 1921, which is about 4 years after the Russian Revolution, Bolshevik Revolution. My father was a professor of Russian literature and Russian history at the University of Moscow. And as time went on, after the revolution, he realized that he couldn't possibly survive for any length of time in Soviet Union without being eventually arrested and either executed or sent to a labor camp. So he decided to leave the Soviet Union and try to get out of there with his family. My mother died when I was 4 years old, so my father remarried. So there were 4 of us trying to get out of the Soviet Union. It was my father, his second wife, my stepmother, my older sister, she was 5 years older than I was, and I, who was at that time 9 years old. We crossed the border from the Soviet Union into Poland. In those days, there was no way of getting out of the Soviet Union legally, so we had to run across the border. The guards were shooting after us. We managed somehow, miraculously, to get across. None of us were hurt. We found ourselves in Poland. Polish government granted us political asylum as political refugees. And we found ourselves in Warsaw as stateless persons under the protection of whatever that meant of League of Nations. We lived in Warsaw, and for the first few years, it was 1930 forward, life was in Warsaw was very tough for us. We didn't speak Polish. My father's profession was of no use in Warsaw. Depression that started about that time in the United States was also starting in Europe and in Poland also. So we had a really, really hard time for several years after we arrived in Warsaw. Eventually, by mid-30s, we kind of got ourselves on our feet. My father got a job with a research institute in Warsaw, which was funded by Polish government. It was researching the subversive activities of communism. My sister got married to another Russian emigre who was a forestry engineer, and he worked at the Ministry of Forestry in Warsaw. I, after passing an entrance exam, managed to get into a very elite Polish gymnasium in Warsaw. It was one of the best schools in the country. It was very difficult to get into, but I managed to pass the entrance exams and was accepted. And by 39, I was entering my senior year into the gymnasium, and following year I was going to get my diploma, and then I hoped to start my engineering education at the Warsaw Technical University. We moved out of the downtown Warsaw into the suburbs, and now I direct you to map 1 if you want to look at the map of Warsaw. Warsaw was kind of divided, well, it's still divided, by a rather large river, Vistula River, that is indicated on the map. Most of the city, center of the city, is on the west side, and the east side are mostly suburbs, and then
I thought this man was trying to get your attention. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Gary.
well, we moved into suburbs. I, at the time, was living with my sister, who was just married a few years before that. And we moved into Rembertów, which was, I marked the town in green here. And my father moved into another town a little further south. He and his wife, my stepmother, and by that time they had a little son. He was maybe 3 years old, 4 years old, about. Both towns were on a high-speed commuting rail, electric high transit train, so that we could commute into the city. My father to his job, my brother-in-law to his job, and I to the gymnasium in downtown Warsaw, just by very comfortable and frequently running commuter train. It was, by that time, pretty comfortable, normal life that we had. By 1939, the clouds of war beginning to appear, and if you look at the second map, it shows the Polish boundaries as they were before the Second World War. Poland, of course, is a very ancient country. It was founded back in 960 AD, 1,000 years or 1,100 years ago. It was a very ancient kingdom, and it existed in Europe for a long time. For a period of time, it was a very powerful country, one of the most powerful countries in Europe. But gradually, because of political divisions in the country, it gradually declined, and by 18th century it was divided by its neighbors, Russia, Germany, and Austria, and it disappeared. It just became part of Russia, Germany, and Austria. After the First World War, after Germany and Austria, Hungary lost the war, the Treaty of Versailles established a sovereign country of Poland again, and in order to provide opportunities for trade development, the country, newly established country of Poland, was given a corridor through what previously was German territory to the Baltic Sea. You can see it on the map here. And also, city of Danzig, German city of Danzig, in Polish you would call it Gdańsk. That's where Lech Walesa started his, if you remember, his solidarity movement later, many years later. That city, under Treaty of Versailles, was declared independent sovereign city, independent of Germany, but under protection of Poland. And the idea of creating the city was to provide to Poland a large harbor that they could use for trading with the outside world. A large city in Poland, which I will be talking about later, is to the west, in western part of Poland. It's called Poznan, or Posen, in German Posen and Polish Poznań. It's indicated here, kind of west from Warsaw. That was before the First World War. It was part of Germany for 100 years or 120 years. But after the Versailles Treaty, it became part of Poland again, as it was for many years before Poland was divided. Well, Hitler, by 1938, he absorbed Austria, he occupied Czechoslovakia, and by 1939,